The major event of the morning, the major official event, is the celebration in Philadelphia at Independence Hall, where President Ford is going to speak shortly. He's been running a little late today. With him, our White House correspondent is Ann Compton. What caused the delay, Ann?
Well, Harry, I'm afraid that President Ford is as vulnerable to weather as anybody else is, even if it's the nation's 200th birthday. As we came into Valley Forge earlier this morning, his helicopter had to circle for about 10 minutes while we found a way to come in down through the crowd. But the sky's clear here, and President Ford is looking forward to what is obviously his most significant speech at this bicentennial weekend. He had originally thought of giving just one major speech, and they revised that he's doing 6 short speeches. And this is number 5 in that series. It's the most important because he is at this point in the bicentennial weekend, instead of looking back at the spirit of America, looking back at the kind of motivating forces that he finds in the bicentennial weekend, this time President Ford is going to offer an agenda for the future. He's going to give a look ahead. And I think it's that look ahead that President Ford's having the most fun with on this bicentennial weekend. After all, he's helicoptering around to several different cities. He's taking advantage of all the 20th century technology, and he's finding that being president on this 200th anniversary is probably the best part of being in office.
Well, President Ford is a man who appreciates that aspect of the presidency. I remember in an interview at Camp David a year and a half ago, when he'd been in office a fairly short time, I asked him if with all the problems and all the awesome responsibilities of being president, there weren't some nice things about it, and he says, it's fun.
You know, he said that in a bicentennial speech last night, in which he had a chance to take a lighter side of this, talk about laughter and liberty go together. He went to a musical event at the Kennedy Center in Washington, and he is finding that this is a time when he can really help almost feel a tangible buoying of spirits of Americans, and he finds that very encouraging right now. It's going to be a long, hot summer politically for him.
It's not a bad holiday to come during the middle of a political campaign or when he's within 20 or 30 delegate votes of Ronald Reagan. There's an advantage of being president that there's just nothing an opponent can do about on a day like today, because people do want to see the president.
Very true. He did not bring Mrs. Ford with him on this part of the trip.
I think he is about to speak now.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Charlton Heston, Mayor Rizzo, Governor Schaap, Reverend clergy, distinguished members of Congress, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On Washington's birthday in 1861, a fortnight after 6 states had formed a confederacy of their own, Abraham Lincoln came here to Independence Hall, knowing that in 10 days, he would face the cruelest national crisis of our 85-year history. I am filled with deep emotion, he said, at finding myself standing here in the place where collected together the wisdom, the patriotism, the devotion to principle from which sprang the institutions under which we live. Today, we can all share these simple, noble sentiments. Like Lincoln, I feel both pride and humility, rejoicing and reverence, as I stand in the place where 2 centuries ago the United States of America was conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. From this small but beautiful building, then the most imposing structure in the colonies, came the 2 great documents that continue to supply the moral and intellectual power for the American adventure in self-government. Before me is the great bronze bell that joyously rang out the news of the birth of our nation from the steeple of the State House. It was never intended to be a church bell. Yet a generation before the great events of 1776, the elected Assembly of Pennsylvania ordered it to be inscribed with this biblical verse: proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. The American settlers had many, many hardships, but they had more liberty than any other people on earth. That was what they came for and what they meant to keep. The verse from Leviticus on the Liberty Bell refers to the ancient Jewish year of Jubilee. In every 50th year, the Jubilee restored the land and the equality of persons that prevailed when the children of Israel entered the land of promise. And both gifts came from God, as the Jubilee regularly reminded them. Our founding fathers knew their Bibles as well as their Blackstone. They boldly reversed the age-old political theory that kings derive their powers from God and asserted that both powers and unalienable rights belong to the people as direct endowments from their Creator. Furthermore, they declared that governments are instituted among men to secure their rights and to serve their purposes, and governments continue only so long as they have the consent of the governed. When George Washington, already commanding the American Continental Army in the field, the Second Continental Congress met here in 1776, not to demand new liberties, but to regain long-established rights which were being taken away from them without their consent. The American Revolution was unique and remains unique in that it was fought in the name of the law as well as liberty. At the start, the Declaration of Independence proclaimed the divine source of individual rights and the purpose of human government as Americans understood it. That purpose is to secure the rights of individuals against even government itself. But the Declaration did not tell us how to accomplish this purpose or what kind of government to set up. First, our independence had to be won. It was not won easily. At the nearby encampment of Valley Forge, the rude bridge at Concord, and the crumbling battlements of Yorktown bear vivid interest. We have heard much, though we cannot hear it too often, about 56 Americans who cast their votes and later signed their names to Thomas Jefferson's ringing Declaration of Equality and Freedom, so movingly read to us this morning by Miss Marian Anderson. Do you know what price the signers of that parchment paid for their patriotism, the devotion to principle of which Lincoln spoke? John Hancock of Massachusetts was one of the wealthiest men who came to Philadelphia. Later, as he stood outside Boston and watched the enemy sweep by, he said, "Burn Boston, though it makes John Hancock a beggar." Altogether, of the 56 men who signed our great declaration, 5 were taken prisoner, 12 had their homes sacked, 2 lost their sons, 9 died in the war itself. Those men knew what they were doing. In the final stirring words of the Declaration, they pledged to one another our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And when liberty was at stake, they were willing to pay the price. We owe a great debt to these founders and to the foot soldier who followed General Washington into battle after battle, retreat after retreat. But it is important to remember that final success in that struggle for independence, as in the many struggles that have followed, was due to the strength and support of ordinary men and women who were motivated by 3 powerful